Welcome to the Marine Conservation League Climate Action Working Group meeting for March. And I'm Bob Miller. I'm here with my co-chair, Ken Strong, and we're Marine Conservation League board members. For nearly 90 years, Marine Conservation League's mission has been to preserve, protect, and enhance the natural assets of Marin. And 5 years ago, we changed that. We added in a changing environment to our mission statement in recognition of the impact of climate change, as well as land use changes, pathogens, and invasive. To help meet that mission, Marine Conservation League Climate Action Working Group advocates for faster greenhouse gas emissions reductions and carbon removal. And that's by advocating for innovative emerging technologies and policies that accelerate greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And it's to slow climate change that's so damaging to natural assets in Marin and everywhere else. We advocate with elected and agency decision makers and their staff, with in local and countywide jurisdictions and agencies. We advocate with Damon Connolly and Mike McGuire, and with Jared Hoffman at the national level. The other Marine Conservation League issue committees, Parks and Open Space, Land Use, Transportation, and Water, address a wide range of issues, but they are the ones that deal with adaptation. There was a particularly excellent Parks and Open Space meeting which included adaptation in Marin that just happened a few days ago. So our climate change advocacy is comprehensive, and we're advocating for both mitigating and adapting to climate change. So I chair another effort of active members who are interested in the wonkier aspects of policy position development. And so if you're interested in that side of things, then contact me at robertmiller454@gmail.com. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that none of what we do is free. Your support is necessary, and becoming a member is important to us. So before we go further, Ken Strong has an announcement about the next Climate Action Working Group meeting.
Yeah, two things. First of all, as far as that's concerned, we'll have more information at the end of this meeting. But we're going to do a joint meeting with the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership here in Marin on an update on wildfire risk assessment and the state of the homeowners insurance market in the state of California. Because it's a joint program, that one's going to be on April 8th, which is a Tuesday at 2 p.m. rather than our standard time. It probably will be just a Zoom meeting, but more details will follow on that. And then I thought before we just got started, we had to go around, since we can see who's on Zoom, that we ought to introduce who's in the room.
Sure. I'm Bob Miller with Marine Conservation League, and
Ken Strong.
Bill Carney with Marin Can and Sustainable Summer Fall.
Phil Cranenberg, former trustee at the College Marin, and business professional that's worked in this space and related areas.
Dale McClure, proponent of Sustainable Healthy Earth Act.
Great.
Bernie Samet, Marine Conservation League. I advocate for building electric.
Dan Sagan, Marine Conservation League.
Hi, everybody. Sam Irvin, Senior Strategic Initiative Manager at MCE, working on our virtual power plant efforts and strategic programs to help accelerate the mission vision of MCE in our communities.
Hi, everyone. Greg Thompson. I've been involved in clean energy, focused on local clean energy for a few years in multiple organizations.
Bob, excuse me, Bob Archer, MCL, and also Citizens Climate Lobby.
Yeah, Crystal member, MCL.
Okay, so, why don't we move then, briefly, Yang Yu is with us. Hi. Some housekeeping for folks who are in Zoom. Please keep yourself on mute, put your questions in chat. This helps the speakers know what's coming. Know that we're recording this meeting, and with the permission of the speakers, it will be made available on our YouTube channel. And please consider attending in person. There are a bunch of us that feel that more happens when people are in the room. And there are donut holes.
And coffee.
So we're gonna have, Climate Action Working Group, MCL, is gonna have more sessions on harnessing multiple distributed energy resources, like rooftop solar panels, home batteries, EV charging, smart appliances, including heat pumps. Those distributed energy resources are scattered across hundreds or thousands of households. They can be coordinated through software and hardware, and acting together, they can act as a type of power plant. Either individuals that are not more connected to each other across a wide area, or folks that are very connected to each other in microgrids. They're needed because solar and wind, and especially solar, are the chief sources of renewable energy here and globally. And something else is needed when the sun don't shine and the wind don't blow, as they say. And virtual power plants and microgrids can be cleaner, more affordable, and resilient than gas plants. So we look at this area as being a primary next source of clean, firm energy. And there are other areas like enhanced geothermal, which may be very big down the road, but this is big now, or can be big now. So Greg Thompson has been a great help in getting the Sunrun and Clean Coalitions speakers. Greg worked for both in the past, so he's going to introduce Yang Yu from Sunrun.
Great, thank you, Bob. Hello, Yang. I'm going to first start out with a bit about Sunrun. For those who don't know, Sunrun is the leading provider of clean energy as a subscription service, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why it can become so scalable, because it's easy to subscribe to it and get it on your roof or neighbor's roof or whatever. So they're serving over 1 million customers nationwide, and it aggregates its fleet of residential solar and storage systems into virtual power plants. I was very fortunate to work at Sunrun as the product lead to help establish the virtual power plant platform initially. And then, so Yang is with us. Thank you, Yang, for joining us. And he is the Senior Manager of Business Development and Market Strategy at Sunrun. He oversees the business development function of virtual power plants in California and Hawaii, primarily working with state regulators, utilities, CCAs, and wholesale markets. So handing it off to Yang. Welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Greg. Really excited to be here today to share some of our VPP experience with all of you, and sorry for not being able to make it in person. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, but there you go.
Got it.
Great.
I just shared the full screen, so probably easier for
Can you make this
you
available
folks to
here?
see it.
Yes,
Yes.
that's fine.
Great. Yeah, just repeat a quick introduction about myself. I'm the Senior Business Development Manager in the Grid Services team at Sunrun. I focus on origination on virtual power plants, primarily in California and Hawaii. I usually work with state regulators, utilities, CCAs, wholesale market, and open up different VPP programs for our battery fleet. This is the agenda for today. I'm not going to go through every one of them. I think let's just dive into the details here. Yeah, before start talking about virtual power plant, just want to do a quick introduction about Sunrun. As Greg said, we are the largest residential solar and battery provider in the country. We pioneered the solar PPA model back in 2007, and we added batteries in our fleet in 2016. Last year, we just reached our 1 million customer mark, and we also installed, like, I think 2 years ago, we repositioned ourselves as a storage first company, and now we have over 135,000 batteries installed nationwide. And from the VPP front, we are also the largest residential VPP aggregator in the industry. Last year in 2024, more than 16,000 customers enrolled in the CEC DSGS program in California. And in Puerto Rico, we also have more than 4,000 batteries enrolled in the VPP program, helping all Puerto Rican keep the lights on, given the utility grid on the island is pretty fragile. And last year, we also ran the first customer-facing vehicle-to-home grid services in partnership with BG&E and Ford. So that's some of the high-level overview about Sunrun and our VPP business line. Just want to have a quick reset on what is a virtual power plant. The definition is pretty simple. So VPP is just an aggregation of distributed energy resource. That can include smart appliances, rooftop solar with batteries, EV chargers, commercial industrial load. They can basically provide the same level of service compared to a traditional utility scale generation. In terms of the common use cases, peak shaving, peak load reduction are the most common use cases you see nationwide. They also could provide resource adequacy service, especially in California, emergency reliability service such as CEC DSGS or ERP, and also if the DER are sitting behind some of the most critical circuit or substation, it can also provide unique T&D value to the utility. And in terms of the Sunrun role over here, obviously we are a project developer, a financial provider to install solar and batteries, but we are also a VPP aggregator. So we recruit customer directly, we enroll the customer into the program, we onboard the asset with our DERM platform, and we dispatch the batteries for grid services, talking to our grid services off-taker. And this chart, I think, outline how we actually operate a VPP from a technical standpoint. I think a lot of the VPP aggregator basically follow the same logic over here. So basically, we sit at the middle, Sunrun VPP platform, and we talk to both our grid services client and we talk to our battery as well. So between our platform and our battery OEM vendor like Tesla, SolarEdge, LG, Franklin, we have direct API integration with all the battery provider so that we can dispatch the batteries for daily time of use or grid services use cases. And we partner with Lunar Energy. They are one of our battery vendor, but we also use their DERM platform to do the energy optimization for our asset. And then we talk to our grid services client. It can be utility, it can be a CCA or wholesale market to report battery telemetry data, to report battery performance data, and also get what are the dispatch commands from our grid services client. And before I dive into some of our program in the market, I think I just want to emphasize, given our experience from the last 5 years, I think we summarize what are the VPP program best practice or what are the best design nationwide. I think the key theme here is simplicity really sells and complexity really kills. When you talk to some of the utilities, they want to do everything like ancillary service, frequency regulation. The residential battery can actually do it, but the cost of doing so is really expensive and is really not the best use case for residential battery to provide certain services. So I think we should really focus on what actually work and what is the least cost services to do so. In terms of policy support, especially California, like everyone I think in the room understand there's a lot of budget cut over the last year. I think a strong policy support is really crucial to support a long-term program stability or certainty. When we talk to the CEC DSGS program, I'll provide more detail why, long-term stability is really crucial. And the next thing I think is statewide program really matters. I think a lot of the industry players are talking about pilot. Basically, you are looking at 10 batteries, 50 batteries, or 100 batteries the most doing a program. When you look at a subscale program, the unit cost really drives up, really increase substantially. So I think here is how can we scale the program with more batteries, with more customer participate, is really important to drive the overall cost down to be competitive compared to traditional utility scale generation. And next thing is the aggregator model really works over here. So I mentioned, Sunrun is a VPP aggregator. So instead of for a CCA or a utility or wholesale market, try to recruit a single residential customer each at a time. Working with an aggregator, and the aggregator have a direct relationship with their customer, they, including Sunrun, we can talk to our customer, recruit most of our fleet into a single program that can really increase the scale and drive down the cost. And another thing to mention here is the utility direct control sometimes really don't work over here because remember, when we deploy solar and batteries with our customer, we establish a solar PPA, including our battery. With that PPA, basically, we promise customer a set of savings. And to deliver that set of savings, we need to optimize the solar and battery on a daily basis to achieve that level of savings. If utility or another counterparty take control on this asset directly, we cannot make a promise again to our customer a level of savings. So rather than let the utility do the control, let the aggregator maintain the same level of control on the asset to make sure when that customer is doing a VPP, their existing bill savings is not affected negatively. And another thing I think really succeed from certain perspective is we can do auto enrollment with a lot of our customers into the VPP program. And the reason we can do that from a legal standpoint is when we sign a customer agreement with our customer, that agreement already cover certain grid services terms and conditions, allowing Sunrun to auto enroll our customer into their program as a VPP aggregator. And when you do auto enrollment, the opt-out rate from our customer base is really small. It's like sub 10%. But let's say if you need every single customer to sign a term condition explicitly, that opt-in rate is usually sub 20%, 10 to 20%. A 20% opt-in rate versus 90%, a 10% opt-out rate. The difference over here is really big. I think next one, I want to dive into our specific program. I think I mentioned here. So we frame the CEC demand side grid support program as Sunrun Cal-Ready program. That's our customer facing name to our customer base. This program was supported by a specific state legislative funding. It was created back in 2022, but back then, behind meter storage from the residential market was not able to participate. So we work really closely with CEC and also our trade association to open up this program for behind meter storage. And now we can participate under option 3 as a participation pathway. And last year, again, I just want to highlight our 2024 statistics. Almost 16,000 customers participate, and our instantaneous peak power is nearly 60 megawatts. So that's basically on par with a traditional utility scale generation. And I want to highlight some of the risks over here. One thing is definitely on the budget. There was a big amount of money approved for this program, but only a subset of that has been appropriate, and there's constantly a budget cut conversation at the state level. So we don't know how much money will be available year over year. So that means I cannot go out, recruit my customer for this program for the next 5 years. Instead, I have to talk to that same customer year over year because I don't know, if next year the program may be already over, if the budget exhausted. So the customer acquisition cost over here is pretty high because even we auto enroll our customer, we still every year over year, we have to provide a customer payment to incentivize to stay in the program, also compensate their great services performance. So on the other hand, if we can have a long-term budget certainty, I can enroll that customer in this program for 5 years, and the cost of enrolling that customer will be substantially lower. And on the other side, I think one major risk, is on how to measure battery performance. So I think CEC next year is going to adjust the baseline methodology, and also every 2 years they may change that. I think a stable program design is really crucial here. Otherwise, year over year, how you measure battery performance will dictate how much revenue you can get from a single battery, and that's also influence how much payment we can share with our customer. Baseline, I think we don't like baseline. We want to measure our battery performance directly at the battery inverter level. It's already a sub meter, it's revenue grade. Instead of looking at a baseline, I think just measure everything at the battery inverter level is really straightforward, and that is a fair evaluation in terms of VPP battery performance here. I think last thing I want to highlight here is if you look at the DSGS program, there's only 16 events for the entire summer season. And the reason of that is the dispatch trigger for this program is very different. Is the dispatch only triggered when the CAISO day-ahead LMP prices is over $200 per megawatt hour between 4 to 9. So only 16 events have been called. But I have to say, our batteries or our VPP fleet can do more than that. How can we do that? I think the last thing I want to mention is the load map program we offer. I saw we have also folks from MCE join this conversation. So this is more to you guys. Instead of only call my battery for 16 events, we can cycle our battery more frequently or even on daily basis, trying to provide a resource adequacy benefit to the low thermal entity, including the CCA customers. We already do that with 3 CCAs in the Bay Area, but this is not a CAISO wholesale market integrated product. We tried that a few years ago with both CCAs and utility. It doesn't work. Why is that? Because the CAISO wholesale market have a lot of barriers for us to provide resource adequacy from the behind the meter battery fleet. Imagine, I think first thing is battery export is not eligible to get RE credit. Imagine thinking about one residential battery, 14 kilowatt hour, 5 kilowatt. The RA resource adequacy capacity credit you can get from that single batteries is only 0.7 kilowatt. That is substantially small compared to a 5 kilowatt, 14 kilowatt hour battery. And if we have to offer that batteries into the RA market, the resource adequacy revenue I get from a single battery is tiny. And that means for 1 megawatt resource adequacy value, I have to enroll a lot more batteries to satisfy that obligation. It just doesn't work economically. And also, if that battery customer have a smart thermostat, a lot of the time that thermostat is already enrolled, let's say the Ohm Connect rush hour program, I cannot register that same battery as PDR, as CAISO resource adequacy product in the same product because CAISO doesn't see, okay, behind this customer meter, there are actually 2 different devices. They are doing 2 different things. but KAISO only see the utility meter level. So enrollment is a big challenge if customer have multiple devices behind the same meter. And also enrollment is really onerous process at the KAISO level. I have to do an opt-in campaign and I lose 90% of my customer in that process because customer need to follow multiple steps to authorize their participation. That's why, on the other hand, we offer this load map product to the CCA. Basically, it's provide a similar resource adequacy benefit instead of it's a supply side resource, it's a demand side resource. So we can dispatch our batteries every single day between 4 to 9 to reduce the CCA peak load demand. And when CCA file your load forecast with a CEC or CPUC, you can recognize that peak load reduction on a regular basis across entire 12 months so that the following year you get a smaller RA obligation. So it's an indirect resource adequacy benefit to you. Lastly, I want to highlight, I mentioned a lot about the KAISO challenge for behind meter storage. Right now, there is a KAISO working group. It's very high level. It just started. So this working group is trying to tackle barriers for behind meter batteries to participate in the wholesale market. So I encourage this group, if you ever be part of that working group, trying to advocate, these are the issues from behind meter storage or VPP. And this is going to be like a year-long process. We need to find a new solution to remove all these barriers so that these behind meter resources, including batteries, can be integrated into the wholesale market to provide VPP products such as resource adequacy. I think that is the last slides of my presentation. I think I'll just open up the floor for conversations, questions, or comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Yang. You covered a lot of territory and very, very well. For folks that are not following the energy markets as closely as some of us do, there are lots of acronyms that are out there, in the next e-news or the one after that, we'll be sure to define them all for you. So are there questions? I know I have one to start off with, which is monetizing all of the services that virtual power plants can provide is a big issue. And there are challenges to that monetization. I read your LinkedIn post, Yang, about your contract with Piccolo, and which is a marketplace for your services, your type of services. They've been expanding in Europe. They're trying to expand here. I'm wondering if you could give us sort of a simple explanation of what they do and what the potential is for changing the ability of services to be monetized.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So Piccolo is an energy marketplace. Basically, they serve as a clearinghouse for energy product to connect between buyer and seller. I have to say, right now, there's a big gap that we can do that for products such as VPP because it's not standardized and it requires a lot of bilateral negotiation between the buyer and seller to agree on how the VPP should work, what are the dispatch parameters, what are the VPP product you want to deliver, and how the compensation or the data communication work. But in the ideal world, if we can standardize different VPP product, then different providers can just go to the platform, list their product, list their pricing, and then the buyer, such as MCE for you guys, come into the marketplace and select what you want. That can facilitate market transaction, and that's a great way to connect a buyer and seller. But I have to say, there's miles away to get to that point, but I think it's a good starting point.
Yeah, and this is Ken Strong. At a simplistic level, can you give an example of the level of compensation that a hypothetical customer could get if they made their solar and battery available to, a program like yours?
Yeah, it depends on the market. So if you look at a very competitive market, the compensation rate is really low. So we can only share a portion of those with our customer while covering our operating cost. Like when we look at our cost stack, it's pretty expensive, like we have to pay our OEM vendor, a better OEM vendor API fee to get access to their API system to dispatch the batteries. We have software costs, everything. So in that case, the customer payments may be like $100, $200 per battery per year. Versus if you look at Puerto Rico, we share basically the majority of the payment with the customer. And I just saw some of the data from last year. One of our customer got more than $1,000 for their participation, but obviously they have 2 Tesla Powerwall on the island, and they make a lot more energy available to the grid services program. Understanding that market is a huge backup market, meaning there's a lot of outage, very frequent. The customer may only want to share 10% of their energy with the grid. They want to keep 90% of the energy in case of outage. In that case, that customer won't be able to get too much of a payment given they only share 10% compared to I can share 90% to the grid. So that's the difference there.
Yeah, just adding to that, when you've got solar and storage somewhere, you've got a management system where you can determine how much of that battery is used for the grid services or the virtual power plant, and how much is just reserved for your house in case of an outage. So you've got very easy way to set your battery to make it work for you and also get as much out of the grid services virtual power plant program as you can.
Yeah, just add to that, even a customer battery is enrolled in the VPP program, we never cycle the battery down to below 20% backup reserve. So basically, the 20% of the energy is always stored in the battery in case of an outage. We do some modeling simulation to see, on average, for a typical outage event, how much energy is required to sustain before the sun goes down again. 20% I think is a good threshold to set. So, and we apply that nationwide. So we never drill down the battery more than 80% of the total available energy.
So net energy metering has been quite controversial here in California, to say the least. And I'm wondering what the impact is of the recent changes to net energy metering 3.0. What impact that's had on your business and on the potential for rapidly expanding home battery use?
Yeah, it sucks, right? Obviously, if you look at the industry data, solar deployments goes down a lot compared to 2 years ago. That's why we reposition ourselves as storage first company. So now basically we stop selling solar only asset to our customer because the economics doesn't work. We pair a storage asset to every single solar panel we sell, and that increase the overall economics for the customer. But again, in that case, under the NBT, net billing tariff, or NEM 3 world, there's going to be an interesting dynamic for a customer to do grid services, because when you look at the most recent NBT tariff, either the retail import credit or retail import rate or export credit, it incentivizes the battery to do self-consumption most of the time. Maybe in a few hours in August, September, the battery makes sense to export. But if I have another grid services program, I need to ask that battery to export more, or basically every day in the entire summer season. That customer may have to pay more on their utility bill. So in this case, doing a grid services program will create a lost opportunity cost on the customer bill. That means I have to pay the customer more, first of all, to cover their increase on the utility bill. And then I provide another incentive for them to stay in the program. All of that means running a grid services program for this MBT fleet will be a lot more expensive. And I'm still trying to figure out the best way to accommodate, okay, how can I protect the customer bill savings while providing the same amount of grid services to the grid, to my off-taker at a competitive price? That is something, a big challenge in this market for sure.
Dan, Dan seconded?
Hi, Yang. I'm looking this way, which is kind of weird. Now I'm
It
facing the
works.
camera, yeah.
No problem.
Yang, can you elaborate on kind of your revenue streams? You just alluded to it, the grid services you provide and kind of divide it between arbitrage, capacity, ancillary services, and anything else. Can you give a feel for kind of how you guys get your revenue stream in?
So right now we focus on just the capacity product. We are not doing like daily energy arbitrage or other ancillary service. We are going to do a non-wire alternative project with IOU in California. Actually, the announcement will come out next week. But most of our product is just capacity product. So we get paid by $1 per kilowatt per month rate. That is our top line revenue. And a big chunk of that goes to customer payment to incentivize them to stay in the program and compensate their battery performance for the VPP. And then the remaining, we pay our battery OEM, DERM platform for the energy optimization, and also cover some of the team overhead. I think it's crucial to point out, you must saw all this industry news about solar industry or battery industry. A lot of the company went bankrupt. So I think it's really important to remain disciplined. Like you cannot just pay your entire grid services payment to your customer. That's not a long-term viable business model. It has to be healthy. You have to be margin positive while maximizing value to the customer.
Thanks for that. And dividing by customer, I take it by what you said about CAISO and their tariff and structure and barriers, that all this is coming from load serving entities? The revenue stream? The capacity revenue stream?
Well, capacity revenue stream come from whoever you contract RA with, right? It can be a CCA, it can be another load serving entity or IOU. Yeah, but if you like right now, the only pathway to monetize behind meter battery VPP in the CAISO market is through resource adequacy. You get a little bit ancillary energy revenue, but it's really small. Most revenue come from resource adequacy, but it's just so challenging to actually do that in the CAISO market.
Thank you.
For
So,
sure.
we're gonna be coming to towards the end of this segment, but I'm curious, different firms are focusing on different devices as the basis for their virtual power plants. So Renew Home just inked a large contract with, I think it was NRG, a multi-year contract focusing on thermostats, which makes sense in Texas because it gets very hot in Texas in a lot of places. Are you thinking of staying with solar and batteries in the foreseeable future? Do you have any plans for focusing on other devices? You mentioned EVs, which is another form of batteries. And could you say something, if you are, could you say something about the complexity of making a switch from, say, solar and batteries to all these other devices?
Yeah, I think, Bob, you're trying to lean towards whole home electrification. That is one area we are always looking at. Beyond solar and storage, what other devices we can offer to our customers? So rather than just optimizing a single asset, it's going to be a co-optimization across all assets. So from customer, they get a more unified energy optimization service. So we are constantly looking at that. We are not doing thermostat at this point. I think from us is a little bit low value given the only thing you can offer from a thermostat is just demand response, and that performance per unit basis is really small. I think what we are looking at is more on the EV side, partner with either automaker or EVSE to look at probably a lot of our customers already have EV and they may have a level 2 charger at their home. Maybe even some of them, they have bi-directional charger. How can I work with automaker or EVSE provider to integrate that devices into the whole ecosystem, co-optimize between solar, stationary battery, and EVSE or EV? That is something we are looking at. I think that's going to be a big plan for us for the next few years.
So are there additional questions for Yang?
Quick,
Carney?
yeah, quick follow-up on that last one. You said you were piloting the vehicle to home program with Ford. Are there other manufacturers that are getting there and providing vehicles that actually allow for that? And if so, who are they? And when will they get there?
It is definitely a more like a newer or newer product in the market. We announced this partnership back in, I would say, 2022. So we started from just backup only. Like, you know, the battery, the EV batteries will only provide backup if your home experience an outage. And then we move on to vehicle to home. So no export to the grid. The constraint over there is more on the interconnection side. The technology side is all set, either from hardware or software. But utility interconnection remain a challenge to enable vehicle to grid. We are actually going to test that with one utility this upcoming summer. I can now say who, given this we haven't announced it publicly. And beyond Ford, yes, we are also talking to other automakers. Some of them, they have similar technology, but I can't share more details given it's still not public yet.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Yang. You gave us quite a tour of the virtual power plant space, and it was very, very helpful. And once again, for those that are not focused on this space, we'll have explanations of some of the acronyms that were tossed out there. Very helpful. Thank you so much.
I just one last thing, actually, from a logistics perspective, we got a question. Yang, are your slides going to be available for as part of the YouTube presentation, or for us to be able to share with our members?
Yeah, I think the slides are separate from YouTube. Are your slides going to be available?
Yes, I can send a copy after this meeting, no problem. And also, I just leave my contact info over here. Again, thanks for having me today. Very excited to share our experience in this market. And if you all have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to engage a follow-up conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yang.
Okay. So in the next segment, we're going to be switching some to microgrids, which also use distributed energy resources, but in a defined area. And we have with us Craig Lewis and Ben Schwartz from Clean Coalition. And just want to make sure that the two of you are here.
Yes.
There's Craig Lewis under the moniker of Ben Schwartz, and Ben Schwartz as himself. All right, we're good. So I'm going to introduce Craig and Ben, and we'll hear a presentation, have a discussion. So Craig Lewis is founder and executive director of Clean Coalition. He has 3 decades plus years of experience in policy and technology innovation, including solar-driven microgrids. And that's really what we're talking about a lot, which is policy and technology innovation. And Craig has the kind of background which is very helpful in dealing with microgrids, which is it's multifaceted. He's worked in senior government relations, corporate development, and marketing positions at leading technology and finance companies. And then following Craig, Ben Schwartz from the Clean Coalition will speak. He's a policy manager at Clean Coalition. He represents it in the proceedings at the California Public Utilities Commission, and also at other regulatory bodies on many issues. And knowing something about the CPUC, being able to represent Clean Coalition in those proceedings is a big deal. Among those other issues are interconnection, net energy metering, community solar, demand flexibility, and much more. So why don't we start off with you, Craig, and then Ben, and then we'll have a discussion.
Sounds good. Can you hear me and see my slides?
We can hear you, and your slides are great, are right out there. Good.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, well, I will just start really quickly with that. I'm going to be mostly talking about the Clean Coalition's Community Microgrid Initiative. And but I'll just introduce the Clean Coalition very quickly. We're a very technical nonprofit. Our mission in life is to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and a modern grid. And we do that through a lot of policy action, much of which you'll hear from Ben right after me. And we also do a lot of work on the program side. And for us, programs is designing actual programs for utilities, CCAs, cities, counties, et cetera. And as an example of that, we're designing a feed and tear program right now for San Diego Community Power, which is the CCA that covers San Diego County, most of San Diego County. And we also, in our program side, we facilitate solar-driven microgrids. And those are both solar microgrids and community microgrids. And I'll define what those are in my next slide. But I did want to say a couple of things. I appreciated Yang's presentation, and I appreciate the trailblazing that Sunrun has done since the beginning. It was nice to see that historical slide. Sunrun, got this market started, this PPA market started back in 2007. That was really cool to be reminded of how long ago that was. And I will also say that the Clean Coalition, we do work with a lot of entities out there in the marketplace. Yang mentioned Piclo as a VPP trading platform. And Robert, I think you also mentioned Piclo quite a bit. And then just to kind of like bridge a few things here, we made the introduction for Piclo to MCE, which now has a Piclo account and hopefully has already been trading some of the load modification offered by Sunrun, which would be kind of a nice way to bring this all together, because I believe that MCE is giving kind of the final presentation this morning. And I saw that Chris Kubik is on this webcon, and Chris is the MCE person who was kind of the entree for Piclo into MCE. So kind of a little small world here. The picture on this slide is a community microgrid that the Clean Coalition is facilitating in the city of Berkeley. And that is a 100% electric, net zero, grid optimal building. Grid optimal meaning that it is never going to pull any energy on a net basis from the grid between 4 and 9 p.m. It's also an 8-story, 100% condominium, 100% affordable housing condominium complex. It is in the process of getting the funding together to get built. But it is a community microgrid with a good number of the assets are front of meter, which is a defining distinction of a community microgrid versus a solar microgrid. And that will launch me into this slide here to define microgrids. It's always important to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page when we're talking about microgrids, because otherwise different people might be thinking different things. But very simply, a microgrid is a combination of energy resources, definitely including generation, that are coordinated to serve specified loads, including in an islanded fashion. Now, you can have microgrids that are 100% never ever, offline, 100% islanded, never connected to a broader grid. But typically, and the type of microgrids that most of us are thinking about are going to be connected to the grid, but capable of operating without the broader grid when that broader grid goes down. And that's what we refer to as in island mode. A solar microgrid is a behind the meter microgrid that relies strictly on solar for the energy generation when islanded. When it's not islanded, you're connected to the grid, so you're going to be, of course, utilizing the solar energy for as much as you can and time shifting it with the battery as much as you can to optimize the economics. But when the broader grid goes down, you're now reliant only on solar to provide your energy resilience, and the solar and the battery to get that resilience. A hybrid solar microgrid is a solar microgrid that includes additional sources of energy generation beyond the solar. So you might have a diesel generator hooked into the solar microgrid, and that turns it into a hybrid solar microgrid. And then a community microgrid is a microgrid that covers a target grid area and relies on existing distribution grid feeders, which means the power lines, the existing power lines, to operate when islanded. So you're going to be sharing information, sharing energy across a target grid area. And community microgrids typically include both front of meter assets and behind the meter resources. So you could have a bunch of solar microgrids in that target grid area, and those solar microgrids are going to be fundamental to the overall operation of the community microgrid. But you're also going to have some front of meter energy storage almost always. In a community microgrid design, you'll almost always have the front of meter energy storage to provide the grid forming and the black start for the entire community microgrid bounded area. And I just make this note, and it'll come up a couple of times in my presentation, is that community microgrids require participation from the utilities, because remember, we need to rely on existing distribution feeders, which means the utilities have to participate because they own those feeders. Nobody gets to touch the feeders unless the utility gives approval, right? And usually it's the utility that's actually touching the feeders, making any modifications, and you're just paying the utility to do that work. So the utilities are a critical partner in community microgrids. And just to kind of give an idea of how the grid is structured, I think most people probably know this or at least have a sense of it, but just to make sure, the transmission grid is everything in PG&E territory, everything at 70 kilovolts and above is transmission grid. It's governed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. It's managed through CAISO. It has a 12% guaranteed return on equity investment on it, right? There's no other investment in the world you could ever make that gives the kind of investment that you get from transmission investments. It's essentially the utilities cash cow. And that's why it's really hard to get utilities to do distributed energy resources, because the more energy you get locally, the less you need from remote resources, and the less energy you need from remote resources, the less you need transmission. And that's their cash cow, right? You're hitting their cash cow. You're shrinking their cash cow if you shrink the opportunity to invest in transmission infrastructure. The transmission grid is broken down into high voltage and low voltage transmission. So that's a distinction most people don't really need to understand here. But once you get to that distribution substation, so the transmission to distribution substation, now you're down to under 69 kV and below in PG&E territory. And that's where people live and work. That's where you actually need energy. And when we're talking about community microgrids, we're talking about getting lots of distributed energy resources into this within the distribution grid, both front of meter and behind the meter. And by the way, VPPs are tremendous at really, kind of making sure that we can balance everything down at that distribution grid level. So VPPs are a super important part of the solution, and can certainly, they're very conducive with community microgrids. This is just another look at the transmission distribution grid demarcation. As I said, we've got this bright line demarcation between the transmission grid, which is up here above this orange line. That's what I'm calling the bright line. And at 69 kV and below, we're down on the distribution grid. Those are governed by different entities, FERC versus CAISO. They have different rates of return. You got 12%, guaranteed rate of return for 50-year assets. On transmission, you got an 8% guaranteed rate of return on equity for distribution grid investments. Those are only 25-year assets. So you don't have to be an economic genius to know that transmission is just this juicy thing, and any capitalist will understand the utilities are just doggedly married to building out as much transmission as they possibly can. I know that I'm going to kind of skip over this slide, or I'm going to go over this slide very quickly. And by the way, the Clean Coalition slides are free to share without any restrictions. So Robert, feel free to, you have a copy of the slides. It's in your email inbox, and you can make any Clean Coalition slides are available. And I will say, the Clean Coalition, we're a very technical nonprofit. Our mission in life is to accelerate this transition, and the Clean Coalition cannot do this one project at a time, right? We have to educate people to get an army to make sure that these types of projects can happen out there. And we need the Sunruns and the MCEs and everybody else that's involved in this transition to help make it happen. So we want our information to be available. We want to collaborate with people to make stuff happen. And what starts with sharing information. So all of our information is public, we make it publicly available, and everything in the slide has been approved for sharing by any partners that might be involved in these slides. So the Santa Barbara region, from an electrical standpoint, is referred to as the Goleta load pocket because it's all, there's only one point of interconnection to the transmission system, and it's at this what's called the Goleta substation. So that's a transmission to distribution substation, and the entire 70-mile coast from Point Conception all the way down to Carpinteria is all served by that one point of interconnection to the transmission system, and therefore it's called the Goleta load pocket, named after the substation. Super grid vulnerable, not just because it's a single point of failure through the substation, but it also has a 40-mile route of transmission lines. There's two lines, but they're on exactly the same transmission towers, which means one line goes down, they're both going down. And Edison has been very clear, these lines could be down for months at a time, depending on, what kind of disaster brings them down. So we need to get a whole bunch of distributed energy resources into the Santa Barbara region in order to protect ourselves for these grid outages. Clean Coalition's done a lot of analysis. We know if we get 200 megawatts of additional solar and 400 megawatt hours of additional energy storage, we're scot-free. We can operate for the rest of time without being connected to the transmission system. And that's not like putting a man on the moon. That's pretty easy. It's 15% of the or 7% of the technical siting potential for solar in the region, on rooftops and parking lots. No ground based, just 7%, 1 out of every 15 rooftops and parking lots. And then getting to the energy storage magic number is actually a lot easier than that. We've already got hundreds of megawatt hours of energy storage in the Santa Barbara region. I'm not going to get too much in this, but I'll just say that transmission route that's 70 miles long goes right through the heart of extreme fire, landslide, earthquake risk. Right, it's super vulnerable, and it could be down for months at a time. So Santa Barbara region has a real motivation to make sure that it's covered with distributed energy resources and community microgrids. Those resources have to be configured to make sure that they can island when that transmission connection goes down. This is a part of the Gleason Load Pocket. You got University of California, Santa Barbara, UCSB right there. You've got the airport. You've got a whole bunch of fire, direct relief, emergency response stuff going on in here. And you've got some really big batteries as well. So there's already a battery that's 120 megawatt hours that's been put in place here. There's another one that's 240 megawatt hours. There's another one coming that's another 120 megawatt hours. We got a bunch of energy storage that's coming here, right? So we can do this. We just got to get Edison and, to get out of the way on getting the solar in place. We need that 200 megawatts of additional solar. And we need for the policymakers to help us make sure that Edison gets out of the way on getting that solar in place. This is a block diagram of it. I'm not gonna go into any details here because we don't have time, but these slides are available for everybody to peruse at their leisure. The Clean Coalition established the Community Microgrid Initiative. This is the website to it, so you can get way more information, from the Clean Coalition's website, and encourage you to go there if you're interested. I'll say that the Clean Coalition has a very long history in community microgrids. We started when Greg Thompson was working with the Clean Coalition. This is going back, probably close to a dozen years ago, and we had the Hunters Point Community Microgrid in San Francisco. We've done community microgrids from the East Coast to the West Coast, from Washington State, down to San Diego. So we pretty much have the four corners of the United States, and we're working on a community microgrid in Hawaii. That's the Kapalama Container Terminal, a community microgrid out in Honolulu. So we've really literally worked all around the country, and it's pretty exciting to see that kind of we're getting to a stage where it looks like community microgrids are actually going to have a play, and we've kind of got enough kinks in the armor that we're going to be able to navigate around the utilities, which are the hardest stakeholder to deal with. So here's the key stake. This is a list of the 8 key stakeholder groups. The utilities are colored in yellow for a reason. They're really hard to deal with. And this is kind of the community microgrids are a bit of the Pandora's box for the utilities. They know how to make money and make lots of money from the existing business model. They do not know what the future will bring if we really kind of open the Pandora's box on community microgrids. So they're very nervous, and they don't do much without the utilities, without the policymakers kind of forcing them to do things. And luckily, the policymakers here in California have done some things to force the utilities to move it forward, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Clean Coalition has a methodology, and Yang, I'm glad to see that you're still hanging here with the group. The value resilience 1, 2, 3 methodology. I don't have time to go into any of the details, but we tier the loads into critical loads, tier 1, priority loads, tier 2, discretionary loads, tier 3. The critical loads have to stay on forever, right? You have to design your solar microgrids and your community microgrids to make sure that the critical loads will never, ever turn off. And the rest of the loads, you can toggle them on and off as needed based on how much solar energy is available. And I just want to say one thing that, Yang, I'd love to talk with Sunrun about this, is that, the amount of energy you have to keep in a battery, you do have to be conscious of when there's a storm coming and whatnot. But you also, until the later part of an afternoon, if you're on a sunny day, you only need about an hour of typically the amount of energy storage that you have versus the amount of solar. You only need about an hour of sunlight at the end of the day to charge up your battery to full. So before that last hour of sunlight happens, you can play with that battery to 100% to 0%, right? I'm not saying you take it down to 0, but I'm just theoretically, right? You could go a full 100% and play with that battery throughout the day, and then just at when that's an hour before the sun sets, you basically have to make sure you get your state of charge on that battery up to whatever level you need to ride through to whatever the solar forecast is for the next day. This VOR 1, 2, 3 concept goes into a lot of those details, and we've got the link to a really useful webinar there. I would encourage people that are interested in resilience and solar-driven resilience to watch this webinar. We've taken that same concept and extended it out to the community microgrid level. So in addition to tiering loads, which we tier here on the vertical axis of this matrix, we also tier facilities. So obviously a fire station has much more societal value and importance during a grid outage than, say, a clothing store. Tiering loads is really important, and Clean Coalition, we're big proponents of this, what we call the resilient energy subscription market mechanism, which we designed, and the Clean Coalition is promoting into the CPUC and other places. And we believe that if you're at a tier 1 facility, a tier 1 load at a tier 1 facility, so think about like the dispatch and the fuel pump at the fire station, right? Those have massive societal value, and society should pay for a community microgrid that serves those, those tier 1 loads at tier 1 facilities. There should be no argument about that. So that's the dark green. The light green, right? You can kind of argue one way or another whether society should pay that, whether through ratepayers pay it or taxpayers pay it. Like one way or another, society should pay for the dark green, maybe the light green, and then the yellow is like stuff that private entities should be willing to pay for themselves. And the gray is like if some entity has lots of money and they would just want to keep all their loads on, even their even their discretionary loads, their tier 3 loads, like they should be able to have the option to pay for that, right? And to get it. But most people wouldn't keep their tier 3 loads on if they had to pay to do it. So I'm going to go into some specific community microgrids. And Greg, maybe I could ask you for a time check. How far into my 20 minutes am I? Have you been tracking that? I don't want to squeeze our MCE speaker. There's an MCE speaker at the end, right?
I don't have the exact amount, Craig, but you're
Okay.
pretty far in.
Okay, I'll keep going. I'm gonna go quickly. I mentioned that the state of California has kind of started to move forward with community microgrids for real. The very first community microgrid in California, I'll call it the first official community microgrid in California, is the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid up in Humboldt County. I've been on the technical advisory committee of that project. It's been going on for several years. It's been successfully operational for several years. It's a partnership between Redwood Coast Energy Authority, RCEA, which is the CCA covering Humboldt County, and PG&E. And it's a community microgrid that covers the Redwood Coast Airport, a Coast Guard station, and 18 additional customers. It's at the end of a feeder. And that kind of showed the way for the state of California that, yes, this all makes sense to do community microgrids. And they designed a program called the Microgrid Incentive Program, referred to as the MIP, the MIP. And so the MIP Tranche 1 opened about a year and a half ago. The Clean Coalition submitted 4 projects that are all in Marin County. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that. I know this is the Marin Conservation League, so the Clean Coalition is doing a lot of work in Marin County, where that's highly relevant to the things that this group cares about. So the projects are in Marshall, Point Reyes Station, and then there's 2 in Tomales. When we split Tomales into 2 pieces, Tomales West and Tomales East. And out of those 4 projects, all were deemed eligible. So there were 50 projects that got submitted. 22 were deemed to be eligible, and then they all got force ranked. And we came in number 4, number 12, 13, and 14 at the final score. So that's this, if you can see my cursor, I'm circling where we got, or I guess we got in number 4 for Tomales West, 12, 14, and 15. So those were where we got force ranked out of the 22 that were deemed eligible. And the first 9 got funded. So luckily, Tomales West is moving forward under the first tranche of the Microgrid Incentive Program. Just wanted to kind of show you how that all got scored. Unfortunately, the reason that you can see from our benefits points, we would have won all of these if we hadn't asked for as much money. So this AIR, that's basically the amount of grant money you're asking for through the Microgrid Incentive Program. You can see Tomales West won, and the reason that project won, even though it didn't have the highest score, Tomales East actually had a higher benefit score. But because the Tomales East was asking for more than twice as much money, at the end, your benefit score gets divided by the amount of money you're asking for. So it ended up with half the overall score, or less than half. It got a 92 versus a 228, right? This is the final score over here in this last column. So what I wanted to just kind of say is that the second tranche of microgrid incentive programs is opening up, and those projects, those proposals are going to be due by the end of May. And we're planning to go back and resubmit Marshall, Tomales East, and then we're going to take Point Reyes Station, and we're going to split that into two, just like we did for Tomales. So we're going to actually be putting 4 additional applications in Marin County. And by splitting Point Reyes Station into half, like those would come down to be like $3.5 million grant requests, as opposed to a $7.2 million grant request. Was there a question? Was somebody trying to ask something?
Yeah, Craig, I think it'll be up to you, but we want to have time for our MCE speaker. So
I'll go real quick. I'll finish real quickly. So this is just a view of Tomales West. This is where the solar is going to go. There's a Shoreline School District Shoreline Unified School District has a surplus site there that is where the solar is going to be sited. This is a block diagram of the the electrical configuration of the community microgrid. This is a look at Point Reyes West, what we're going to be submitting in. This is Point Reyes East. This is Tomales East, and this is Marshall. So I just wanted to give you all a sense of that. We have a microgrid incentive program that's moving forward with Southern California Edison in East Los Angeles, which is county. Clean Coalition is the primary consultant to Los Angeles County for all of their solar-driven microgrid activities. So we've got a community microgrid through Southern California Edison's MIP that's moving forward, and this is a view of what that looks like. And then we've got the Kapalama container terminal out in Hawaii, and I'll just kind of I'll finish with that slide, and this is the block diagram of that. We're going to have lots of solar on that site. I think it's 7 megawatts of solar and almost 30 megawatt hours of energy storage. And this will be at this terminal, shipping terminal, will be entirely electric. So all the drayage vehicles, all the cranes, everything is geared to be electric. So that's my last slide, and I will stop it there and take any questions. I'll leave my slides up just in case there's any questions I want to refer back to.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Why don't we hear from Ben?
Okay.
And then have questions. We are going to have to wrap up this segment in probably 15 minutes. So with that in mind, Ben, why don't you present, and let's make sure there's time for adequate discussion.
Sure, that sounds good. Let me share my screen here. Okay, looks like that's working here.
Yep.
All right, great. So let's get started then. Craig really talked about the project, so I'm going to be discussing some of the policies that are needed to achieve California's clean energy goals. And it's good that I'm going after both Yang and Craig because they provided some good details, and hopefully I can add a little bit of foundation here. So achieving California's clean energy goals requires a focus on 3 key aspects. I should say aspects. The first is procurement of energy resources. The second is energizations. And the third are interconnections. And so taking kind of a deeper dive into each of them, when I talk about procurement, it's really ensuring that the market mechanisms, the programs, and the compensation are in place to properly incentivize renewable resources at the scale that we need them in terms of the amount of total capacity to meet our rising electricity demand, as well as in the locations that we need them. And when the Clean Coalition thinks about this, obviously it's in the context of resilience, that if we can get to a total of 25% of our energy coming from local clean energy, that should be enough to ensure that we have resilience. And so that's one of the key aspects, and is also where the state is struggling. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've realized we've had massive capacity shortfalls, particularly with growing demand. And so we've
really sped up the process of trying to get resources deployed to the grid, but that has mostly occurred at the transmission level or the wholesale scale. And the distribution grid, the local clean energy, has not been keeping up in terms of the options for procurement. The main one continues to be net energy metering. And as we talked about with the switch to the net billing tariff or NEM 3.0, the opportunities there have been significantly lower than even what the state had been forecasting. So at this point, we are now not on a pace to meet all of our clean energy goals, particularly forecasts for rooftop solar. So having streamlined procurement, allowing folks to maximize the available space to them, particularly on the built environment, are all important changes that need to happen. And then, of course, there is the whole subject of resource adequacy, which is really kind of an underpinning of our electric system. And, not to go too far into it, but given these massive interconnection queues at CAISO, it's really difficult to receive resource adequacy if a project has to go through that and potentially wait for 3 or more years before it even receives permission to operate and an award of deliverability, which is a prerequisite for RA. So just to summarize that, we need the programs and compensation that can incentivize resources in the places we need them, namely on the distribution grid. And then second, there is energizations. As California tries to achieve its other policy goals, such as housing and economically develop at a faster rate, we need a utility and utilities that are capable of bringing resources online in a timely manner. And so energizations refers to the electric load side of things. Can there be a connection to the grid for new loads, whether that's a data center or an EV charging depot or a new hospital? And interconnections refers to the connection of an actual generator. So your solar panels, your battery, your wind energy, anything along those lines. Now, the Clean Coalition has been working to streamline interconnection, particularly for behind the meter resources for many years. And the state has done actually a relatively good job with that, cutting down the timeline for rooftop solar in some cases down to 60 days or less. But larger resources on the distribution grid, particularly resources that are connected in front of the meter, those same streamlining and efficiencies have not been transferred to that process. And so it's far more difficult to deploy a resource in front of the meter. And that means both in terms of the time it takes to connect that resource, it can be more than 4 times as long, if not longer, and it can cost more than 8 times as much to deploy a resource that is the same size, a 1 megawatt resource behind the meter is far more efficient than a 1 megawatt resource in front of the meter. And so in general, when we're thinking about California's goals, making sure that we have efficient policies for all three, that we are able to procure resources where we need them and then connect them in a streamlined manner is particularly important. And when you're talking about something like a solar microgrid where there is both a load being interconnected and a resource being interconnected, now you're touching on both energizations and interconnections. And ideally, you want those 2 timelines to match up and not have one finish far before the other, and potentially, hold that resource or hold that facility back from operating in the way that it wants to. Okay, so Craig talked a lot about community microgrids, and I think community microgrids are a good way of realizing how complicated things can be. And so the conclusion to take from this slide is that maximizing certainty is critical. And that should include process certainty. In the context of a community microgrid, that means what are the timelines for getting through a project and getting through an application process. Design certainty. Are there certain specifications or technical requirements that an applicant or developer should be aware of? For example, if it's easier to put a grid isolation switch which isolates a specific load on a low voltage side of the transformer rather than higher cost on the high voltage side of the transformer, is that allowed? And what are the fees surrounding that? And then the third is cost certainty, which is just to say that for an applicant to put in the tens of thousands of dollars worth of work that it just takes to size an initial microgrid to make plans about where that boundary should be and then to develop an application. There does need to be some sort of understanding about what the potential cost implications are. There are always going to need to be some degree of grid upgrades associated with a community microgrid. And so it's very useful to understand beforehand what some of those costs are going to look like. For interconnection of behind the meter resources under Rule 21, all three utilities issue what are called unit cost guides. So they say if there is X piece of equipment that needs to be upgraded, this is a likely cost estimate for what that's going to be. If it's a transformer, if it's a secondary feeder, if it's a substation, that so on and so forth, there's a cost estimate. And that's very important with a complicated process like developing a community microgrid. As you can see on the left, and this is from PG&E's microgrid incentive program, going from step one of initiating the process to really getting that microgrid operational can take upwards of 4 years. So it's a long lead time process, and having as much certainty as possible is really important. Okay, so there are two programs, and just to go through these very quickly, Craig described the microgrid incentive program, which provides money for disadvantaged communities and resilience in those communities. It's up to $14 million per project, and that only includes coverage for front of the meter assets, not behind the meter assets, and then $1 million for reimbursing interconnection costs. And as Craig described, the process for scoring applications divides that total score by the amount of funding that is requested, which just means that the more funding a community microgrid applicant is asking for, the lower the total score that application will receive. The idea behind that is we want to spend our money as effectively as possible and cover, the most successful microgrids. But the disadvantage of this is that larger microgrids that actually cover a larger region are less likely to be funded under this process. So this is the program that focuses on disadvantaged communities. And then more recently, the CPUC also passed what's called the CMET, or the Community Microgrid Enablement Tariff. And this is really a framework that focuses on the technical requirements and connections and studies that it takes to get a community microgrid from step A to step Z. It was based or developed based on the Redwood Coast Airport Microgrid RCAM, and has a few interesting changes. Now there is no sizing limit, which means that, as Craig mentioned, it's technically feasible for a microgrid that spans an entire grid area, like a Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid, and they may be deployed on any aspect of the distribution grid, and by that I mean a circuit of any voltage. And then finally, there is a standard application fee for what is called the microgrid islanding study, which does help with some certainty. But the reason I mention these programs is they offer a very clear example of where California is doing well. And the MIP represents one component of that, but also, while we are a leader on microgrids, where there's a big opportunity for change. And so the first issue is with the CMET, which is that the CMET treats community microgrids.
Ben, I really hate to interrupt, but given the timing, we probably only have 7 minutes for the rest of your presentation and discussion. So you're going to have to make some very tough choices here.
Okay, sure. That's totally fine. So I'll just summarize this slide by saying that the compensation isn't there for the microgrid services, that community microgrids provide resilience. They lower the number of potential ignition spots for wildfires. They reduce reliance on the transmission grid, and proper policies would allow these microgrids to value stack, to be compensated for all of the different types of benefits that they provide. And currently our policies do not allow that. And so I'll just conclude with a couple of bills that are out there. The first, AB 740, is on virtual power plants and ensuring that the state starts to actually think about including virtual power plants in our portfolio, our energy portfolio. So that is a critical bill that the Clean Coalition will be supporting. Another bill is SB 500, which starts to change the mindset away from the utilities can only make money on infrastructure and towards aligning the utilities' interests with the interest of the ratepayers through what's called performance-based regulation. So it sets a specific target for something like connections, and if the utility hits or exceeds that target, they make money, and if not, they can potentially be penalized for that. And then two more. AB 1260 by Chris Ward is reforming our community solar programs. Currently, we have a very nascent market, and CPUC efforts really have largely failed at stimulating that market. And then for rooftop solar, SB 710 extends a property tax exemption, so it ensures that deploying rooftop solar does not increase the value of the home in terms of the property tax implications. So I will stop there for now and happy to take some questions.
Thanks so much, Ben. Ken,
Yeah, Ben, is the CPUC high DER proceeding really where all the rules are being made that relate to these sort of topics? If so, I'd like to talk to you about it offline.
Yeah,
if
sure.
that's okay.
So that's a pretty key place where some decisions are being made. We've really been arguing for transparency in the grid maps that are out there so that developers understand where they're siting resources. I just submitted comments, and this goes to energizations on what are called flexible connections, that if the utility can't connect you to the grid for 2 years, maybe there's a way where you can have an agreement and say, I'm only going to use 500 kilowatts until the remaining 2 megawatts is available. So that's another big subject that's being discussed, as well as the future of what a grid operator, a distribution system operator might look like and how they can increase the value of every asset on the grid by optimizing and dispatching it properly.
I'll reach out to you. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Jim Burrows asks, what's the status of the Goleta Pocket microgrid idea?
So the status is that the Clean Coalition's made some really important progress in various sub-elements of it. So we've done solar and solar microgrids at 14 of the Santa Barbara Unified School sites across the Goleta Load Pocket. As I said, solar microgrids are kind of contributory to the broader community microgrid. We made a run at a very small community microgrid in Montecito after the debris flows and fires and mudslides there from back in 2017, 18. And out of that, we ended up getting a couple of solar and solar microgrid projects at some critical community facilities, the fire station and a school that's right there and kind of the heart of it, that's used as a emergency response. The emergency response helicopters come in and out of their playing fields. They store a bunch of the fire department and other entities store a bunch of material, a bunch of equipment at the school site. So it's a really important site for the area of Montecito area. It's called Montecito Union School, for those of you who might be familiar with it. But in any case, we're making progress. We're getting little bits and pieces. We're getting the energy storage is coming in. Clean Coalition, we've facilitated 2 big battery projects in Santa Barbara County so far in the Goleta Load Pocket. We got a 3rd one coming. So the bottleneck is the solar, and as I said, the utilities fighting like hell to keep the solar out of here, just make it really hard. And that's the big bottleneck is we need 200 megawatts of solar and of additional solar, and then we can say goodbye to that transmission connection, right? Forever. We would never need it to come back up. Anyway, I don't know if that answered the question, but that's the answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then just a quick addition is with the regulatory framework is technically not even available. So Southern California Edison is going to release their version of this community microgrid enablement tariff sometime later this year. So, once that happens, we can start that dialogue again with, a real pathway to say that the community microgrid is now allowed. Let's get working on it.
So this has been great, and we are going to have to move to our next speaker in order to keep close to on time. So I encourage people who have questions to put those questions in chat, and we'll be sure to get those to Craig and to Ben. And so let's move on to Sam Irving, who is, his title is Senior Strategic Initiative Manager. This indicates that he's doing a very interesting work. And he's engaged in innovations in technology, partnership, and business model innovations. And among his tasks is scaling MCE's virtual power plant and advancing green baseload firm power projects. He's got the right background for his job. He's been a strategic advisor to a wide range of entities, public utilities, developers, nonprofits, local governments, and the list goes on. He got multifaceted skills, again, essential for virtual power plants. So with that, why don't we move to you?
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for a good introduction there. Let's see if folks can get the slides up here, but thanks for having me today. My name is Sam Irvin. I am new to MCE. I've been with the team about 4 months now. Prior to that, was working in the nonprofit space for a group called the Zero Net Energy Alliance, and also had my own private consulting efforts, kind of supporting community choice aggregators. But I'm really excited to join MCE here. I think that, we're looking at the right stuff for how do we optimize a lot of the good effort that's already happened in the service area through a plethora of existing community programs and utility programs that we've served everybody from commercial businesses, low-income stakeholders, CareFera customers. And really, my job is to think about how we can optimize those efforts and make them more grid aware, make them integrated, and optimize their value so that we can continue to reduce emissions and provide community benefits. So if you go to the next slide, I'll kind of kick it off here. So folks, I'm sure are familiar with this graph, right? This is the California duck curve. And it's really about why reducing the 4 to 9 matters. So in California, we've had a lot of success getting solar on the grid, but often too much. And the reason for that is we're generating at certain times of the year more power than we're actively consuming. And so you'll see the big duck belly here right between the 10 a.m. and the 4 p.m. window there, where you're actually dropping the belly of the duck. And when you take the total amount of power on the grid and you subtract solar, sometimes we go negative, right? And that means that we actually go into negative pricing and we have to turn off some solar systems and curtail. So this is part of the fact that solar is intermittent, as Rob mentioned here. It only is there when the sun is shining. We need new capacity to flex and shape it and flatten this curve out so that we have less volatility, less pricing, and less risk. So you can go to the next slide here. This was great to kind of come behind the folks who spoke earlier, because they kind of did a little bit of one-on-one for me. But in a traditional power plant, you have the power plant that goes to a transformer, steps down its voltage, that goes to the heavy transmission lines. Then it will go to kind of that substation level that Craig just mentioned and the team from CleanCo, and then goes to the neighborhood level of the distribution. So if you click the next couple here, couple things to keep in mind. Power plants are constrained by physics. It matters where they're located. It matters how far power has to go, what it's connected to, and what its source of power was in the first place. We're fortunate that we do have a lot of renewable baseload in the state, but we do have to use natural gas at some times. And importantly, when we use those systems that may have more carbon intensity, is really also managed and dispatched based on things like economics. So cost is a factor. more so than power content label, right? Pricing and contracting and kind of threading the needle into the power market influences our load behavior. So you can click one more time. And on top of that, we have market rules, regulatory constructs, a systems topology, and other factors that make playing this game really a complicated machine. And so if you click through the next slide for me here, we're thinking about this a little differently at MC because we have had the privilege as a community choice aggregator being able to buy power on the market and place it with our customer service area at a cleaner content than was possible through PG&E. That's becoming harder to do as the cost of power and renewables increases. And so we need ways to really kind of look to our local communities to get flexible, controllable load. So in May 2022, MCE joined a $5 million California Energy Commission EPIC grant, specifically focused on our community of Richmond. And the idea was to provide a suite of customer-owned distributed energy resources by this year in order to create a quiet, invisible, clean pocket of power that would establish the learning opportunity for the virtual power plant that MC was going to pursue. We did a lot of projects. We deployed rooftop solar, heat pump water heaters, smart thermostats, plugs in homes, new EV chargers, batteries. We also are working on some commercial property right now, focused on battery and EV charging. We really predominantly focused on low-income community stakeholders and those who have traditionally not had access to programs, and develop these diverse packages to kind of get all sorts of distributed energy resources in homes and businesses. We then manage and control those assets with our distributed energy resource management system that is open source, owned and perpetual licensed by MCE. So that's a strategic choice because we have not relied traditionally on third-party DERM systems or software operators. This is software that our staff is learning how to use, learning how to operate. It's provided by a team called Serious Controls, but we're really getting the subject matter expertise in-house to manage it. Richmond's really interesting because it has been kind of a historic community with large percentage of asthma and carbon impact. There is refinery here. So it's really a perfect opportunity to demonstrate the value of local programs and its impact on people living in their homes, right? Go to the next slide. So what we're planning to do is take those lessons learned, and we were just awarded an additional $5 million from the state of California, also matched by $5 million in MCE funds to scale that effort throughout our full service area. And so we will be looking at working with our existing programs, of which there's more than 21 historic programs, and thinking about how they can integrate into a virtual power plant environment. So we've done a lot of home energy upgrades. We've done commercial building upgrades. We've deployed EV chargers, heat pump water heaters. And right now those assets are creating savings, but by connecting them to the information technology system of our operations of a virtual power plant, we can get more from them. We are required to focus on returning investment and demonstrating that this has value. So we are being measured as part of our grant on the value we create and save. There's a heavy metric focus in this project. And in total, we're targeting 3 megawatts of load shift from those diverse devices. Go to the next slide, please. Some of the goals, our first objective of the new effort is to develop and update our enterprise level distributed energy resource management system that is now open ADR 3.0 certified. So we're getting new certifications, new ways of being transparent with the data exchange we're having between the various devices. Our second objective is to establish a value sharing plan. So as we heard earlier in some of the earlier speakers, there's value created by offering load shift and shape. The idea is that should accrue back to the community. MC as a not-for-profit entity has an interest in keeping our rates affordable, accessible. And so the value we drive is intended to go in part back to the community and help cover the program. Our third objective is expanding it to all our member communities so that we're not just serving Richmond. We do that through objective 4, adapting our existing programs to be VPP ready, and also bringing in new vendors and suppliers and support. We will need new team members to really make this scale. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Our fifth objective is to integrate it with the wholesale energy market and bring some capacity and load into the wholesale market itself to demonstrate new value and new revenue for the community choice aggregation model. Sixth objective, again, the 3 megawatt to load shift through the various devices, and specifically on kind of those return on investment metrics, we need to demonstrate at least a 20% cost recovery. You can go on to the next slide, please. We're really looking at 3 things to do with the VPP. The idea is that if we're able to bring all the devices that are out there into a virtual power plant environment, we can get additional value from them in 3 main ways. The first use case is for that 4 to 9 shift. This is kind of more in line with traditional demand response. The idea is that you dispatch and you get that load shed dropping off so that people are not exposed to the most expensive, most carbon intensive part of power during the day. The next point is each day, MCE looks at the future next day of business, and we buy power to supplement our long-term power procurement activities that occur annually. We true that up in the day ahead. Often in California, we have periods where extreme weather events, other expensive incidences occur, and power gets really volatilely expensive. We've had some periods in California in the summer where things get extremely expensive to be able to procure it from the wholesale market in the day ahead. The idea is that if we see that coming, we look at the weather forecast, we look at other data we have, we can get ahead of it. And instead of looking to the wholesale market as a source of resource, look at our local community, look at our customer base, look at the load they have, and really treat them as an alternative resource that is right there from within our service area. And then the final use case, which of course has some regulatory hurdles to get through that are actually quite significant, but it is to demonstrate market integrated energy bids, where we bring packets or firm blocks of power into the CAISO market. And that's really our reach goal and an opportunity to unlock new revenue streams for the CCA. Again, these produce savings or new revenue. The idea is to share it through on-bill tariffs and other dynamic rates with our customer base. Go to the next slide. So what does this mean for our customers? Ultimately, kind of like, this is all good, Sam, but what are we really aiming for? We're aiming to continue to support that we've done on electrification, offer some new devices that improve comfort and savings in the homes and businesses that we serve, offering bill savings as a result from the load management of those, unlocking new revenue streams, bringing our participants in the program along on that journey and giving them a stake in the game and a return on their participation. And then also we're gaining new situational awareness and data access. That's data access for homeowners and businesses to better see in real time how their energy use is impacting their bills, but also gives new data and information resources to our back office at MCE so we can make more informed strategic decisions based on data-driven information. We're really thinking about a paradigm where we're being relayed in real time more information streams from a diversity of devices and able to count, quantify, partition, target customers to understand where can we better serve. So we can go to the next slide. Some of our near-term priorities, this is kind of where I'll talk about the schedule and where we're going. So this is really the big lift that our team is working on right now. There's 21 historic programs at MCE, and we're evaluating them all for integration into this virtual power plant kind of paradigm. What that means is, more than 3,000 EVs have enrolled in our existing MCE Sync program. 2,000 small commercial sites are participating in Peak Flex. More than 8,000 existing solar customers. 1,200 of them already have battery energy storage. We have 1,800 residential customers participating in home energy savings programs. Those devices are not yet linked to a load management program or a virtual power plant program in any way. And then we're launching a new bidirectional EV charging tariff, just launched this year. And we have also done multifamily energy savings that have served 5,300 units. So MC has a large service area. We've done a lot of program work. Customers are already benefiting from these programs. We're now hoping to return to them, offer the enhanced value of what the virtual power plant can do. And so our workload this first year of the grant is really assessing our needs, prioritizing where to start, looking for those wins and community partnerships that can help us reach these specific customers at the right time with the right messaging. We're establishing our value sharing plans that we can go into those conversations with customers and tell them what they get out of participating. We're establishing those priorities of engagement, who we're talking to when and what media, what format. And then ultimately, we'll be looking for additional financing support and integration and partners in 2026 with 2 waves of RFPs. So part of that, we'll be talking more about kind of in the next year, but the idea is that there are a lot of devices out there in our service area. There's a lot of vendors who have already done great work in the service area to foster customer savings. And that has largely happened without engagement from MCE. And so if we're able to communicate and coordinate better with those vendors, we can align and optimize the power usage that's occurring within our service area. And again, offer additional benefit. We can go to the next slide. Here's kind of the fuller timeline. I'm actually hoping that in 2 weeks, we'll get our official contract with the state of California through our business meeting. We'll complete our contracting with our subcontractors and then launch into kind of that first year of work that I just described. That brings us to 2026. Q1, we're doing more engagement and outreach, RFPs for additional vendor integrations, scaled financing to support the effort. Q2, some of our first enrollments. We'll be working on interoperability, which is this idea of making sure that the devices and things we're talking to can all speak the same language and actually be able to relay information, relay meter data, relay things like state of charge from a battery, so that we can actually read and see what's going on where we traditionally haven't had that visibility. And then ideally, we're targeting end of 2026 for our first bid into the wholesale energy market, which means rolling up a certain amount of load in a certain geography and finding the market window at which we can monetize that value. In 27 through 2029, the project wraps up in 2029. We're hoping to scale out the implementation, doing reporting M&V. Will be a second wave of RFPs. My hope is that if we can pull off this lift, we will show that we've been able to get some return on investment, that this can stand on its own and not be reliant on grant money. And that's going to come from the value of reducing costs for our customers, but also from new revenue. And that new revenue can help pay for ongoing programmatic expertise and continuation of the effort. So I'm happy to take some questions. I did see some kind of come through and share anything about your curiosity you may have.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Succinct and take a lot of time. Great. Annika.
Question about the bidirectional tariff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Not as well as I'd like to. So as I mentioned, I've been with the team about 4 months. The question was about if I can speak about the bidirectional tariff. I'm just learning about it myself. It was in our recent board packets, and you can find some information there.
Yeah. I saw a line that said tariffs. And
By tariffs, we mean I don't mean,
yeah.
Yeah, great question. I'm not talking about tariffs on imported goods or services that MC uses. I'm talking about our billing system. So in our space, we call our different rate classes and classifications. They are sometimes referred to as tariffs. Really, these are in better terms for kind of a setting like this. We're offering bill credits to customers for participating in the virtual power plant, which means they get a credit on their bill equal to the value that they've been able to support with the devices they own or manage in their homes or businesses.
Might change the term.
It's a good point for especially for customer communication. That's a great point.
It's a good point.
Thank you.
Jack, briefly.
it appears, that, these entities, you, PG&E, Southern California Edison, everyone is competing. And the customers, the clients are the residents. And is this brings back the competition that took place way back when with the Edison direct current versus
AC.
thank you, say that a little louder.
Alternating current. Yeah.
Alternate. Now, all of this, at some point, it's a war. But it's not just a war among two, it's a war among many. And you could be doing what you're doing if you'd be working for PG&E. PG&E wouldn't have this competition if they would be doing what everyone is looking at, making things more efficient, more effective. And it boils down to getting solutions implemented. Can you make a comment on this as to where simply
Yeah, it's a great.
many manufacturers of cars, right? And yet the public decides who to
Yeah.
buy.
It's a great question. You know, there is competition for customer attention in California. That is real, right? PG&E, or the investor-owned utilities more broadly, and the CCAs and private sector stakeholders who are offering programs. We do all engage for eyeballs and attention of customers. And my hope is that happens in the interest of optimizing the outcome for the customer. That's not always the case. I can speak kind of personally. The reason I like working for a community choice aggregator is because of the not-for-profit model. And what that unlocks is when these savings accrue through the programs, through our efforts, they don't go to a private shareholder. They go back into the community. And that is the differentiator that makes me, motivated to do the work personally.
Good.
So Sam, MC already has a relationship with 600,000 customers. And that's a huge advantage in terms of enrolling people. You know something about them, you may know something about what they've got. And MC is big enough, right, what, 700 million in expenditures, so that it can accomplish a lot. I guess the questions I have are, MC bringing $1 million to the table to match the community, to match the CEC's $1 million.
5 million.
5 million over
A year, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah.
$1 million and $1 million per year. Is that going to be enough to incentivize customers to look at MCE versus the competition? Scale really matters in terms of getting cost recovery, return on investment. You want to lower your cost of scale. What would additional dollars up front to incentivize customers to play? What might that accomplish?
I mean, it's a good question. I actually think the scale of the funding we have right now is appropriate for where we are. Often with more funding, it's harder to focus on a specific target, right? We have to be intentionally effective at targeting specific customers who can really get the most out of this technology integration that we're talking about. And my hope is that we can get some early wins that helps us create a better position to engage additional capital. right? So I want to see some proof that this can work in a CCA model so that the CCA itself can be able to better negotiate as we're thinking about bringing in other sources of funding, especially if we're engaging with the private markets. That would be my response to that.
Yeah. Ben Schwartz has a question. Ben, why don't you go ahead?
You know what? That's probably me, because I think I used Ben's link to log on.
Okay.
So I was wondering, I was like, I clicked the raise hand and then he showed up at the same time and mine was nowhere to be found. But anyway, my question for you, Sam, is really impressed with the, creativity that MCE is bringing to the game here, and wondering if there would be some openness to have MCE be the partner in the West Marin community microgrids in the same way that RCEA is the partner in the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid up in Humboldt County. Is that something that you think MCE would be open to? And if so, are you a good starting point for that conversation, or are there other folks you would recommend?
It's a good question. I do know that MC has thought about microgrid in the past. Again, Craig, I'm fairly new to the team. I can follow up and see and get back to you.
Okay, cool. And I can send you maybe Greg Thompson sitting next to you there can get your contact details to me. And I'll send you an email on the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid. They just had their most recent update to the technical advisory committee, and I've got a brand new shiny deck on it, and I can, you can share that around the MCE team.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure.
Are there more questions? I know I have many, and we have 3.5 minutes left. So hopefully we can continue our discussion offline. In looking at your objectives, updating your distributed energy resource management system, getting value sharing plan, integrating with the CAISO market, getting 3 megawatts of scale, and getting cost recovery return. It seems like you've got one of the most difficult jobs one could imagine. So it's good that you have the multifaceted background and the skills that you do. It's definitely going to be a challenging road.
Yeah, well, we have a good team, right? It's not just me. I have a lot of organizational support. We also have really good subcontractors on this one. We're working with, for example, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. They have done a lot in other VPP dialogue. It's kind of a new teaming for MCE to partner up with them. They'll help us with some of the math, really kind of helping quantify and measure and work through some of the sticky issues like the baseline methodologies that were mentioned earlier. And we have a really robust team at MCE with a lot of subject matter expertise. And I think what VPP Flex represents is just a desire in the organization that I've felt to share information across department and kind of go the extra mile. So I feel supported, and it's a big list, but worthy cost.
And that's a terrific reply. I guess the last question I have is, other CCAs are engaging in VPP efforts. Has there been a movement on part of those CCAs to share information in an organized fashion and perhaps to do joint work?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a kind of Cal CCA facilitated working group that happens for kind of the insider CCA folks that talk directly staff to staff. I've had the opportunity to connect with staff at other CCAs and learn what they're doing, where problems have been. So there's good knowledge transfer among the CCAs for sure happening.
Okay. Okay, We're almost at noon, so we're going to draw this to a close. I want to sincerely thank our speakers. There was a lot of information put out very well. And we will, again, we will have much more, especially on the virtual power plants in the days ahead. And on distributed energy resources. Including hopefully some speakers again from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. We had a speaker on carbon removal from the atmosphere 2 years ago from them. That's it. And the next.
Yeah, I would just say, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, our next COG meeting is going to be a joint meeting with the ESP, Ecologically Sound Practices, on wildfire and insurance issues. It's going to be April 8th, so it's a different date. It's a Tuesday at 2 p.m. We're still working on some of the logistics. It may be entirely on Zoom, but we're working on some of that. So stay tuned and look at your e-news for details on timing on that.
Great. Okay. Thanks, folks, and we'll see you soon.